Welcome to this explainer. I'm absolutely thrilled you're here today because we are going to dive into the truly fascinating history of behavioral science. We're going to explore how a few historical giants of psychology literally shaped the ethical ways we train and interact with animals today. Whether you've got a dog sitting at your feet right now or you're just endlessly curious about how the brain actually works, this is definitely for you. We are going back in time to understand the absolute foundations of learning.
But, before we talk about modern dog treats, clickers, or the specific techniques you might see a trainer use today, we really have to ask the foundational question. How do animals actually absorb information? What's happening inside their minds when they figure out how the world works? To answer that, we have to strip away all the modern tools and just look at the underlying science.
So let's take a look at our roadmap for today. We'll be covering 1. Pavlov and emotional learning. 2. Skinner and operant conditioning. 3. Seligman, Maier, and control. 4. Connecting the 3 pillars. And 5. Modern ethical animal training.
Let's jump right into Section 1, Pavlov and emotional learning.
Now, ironically, Ivan Pavlov wasn't even trying to study animal behavior. He was actually studying digestion in dogs when he stumbled onto something that completely changed psychology forever. During his research, he noticed something weird. The dogs started salivating before the food even arrived. They were responding to the scientist's lab coats, their footsteps, the routine itself. So he discovered what we now call classical conditioning. This proves that animals learn emotionally by building really powerful, totally involuntary associations between different events in their environment. It's not about an animal making a conscious choice. It's about their brain wiring two things together. It's exactly like how your heart might race when you hear your default smartphone alarm sound, even if you're wide awake in the middle of the day. That is classical conditioning.
To put that into perspective, before any learning happens, an unconditioned stimulus, like food, naturally causes salivation. But through repeated pairings, a completely neutral stimulus, like a ringing bell, becomes a conditioned stimulus. That neutral bell can now trigger the exact same physical and emotional response just as powerfully as the food itself. And listen, this isn't just some dusty old experiment from the history books. It's happening literally all the time in our lives today, whether we intend it to or not. Think about the crazy excitement a dog feels the absolute second they hear the jingle of a leash, or the sheer panic pulling up to the vet clinic because they've associated that specific building with needles and pain. On the flip side, it's the instant relaxation they feel when they see a treat pouch because that pouch consistently predicts good things are coming.
Okay, moving on to Section 2, Skinner and operant conditioning.
If Pavlov showed us how animals learn through involuntary emotional associations, B.F. Skinner kind of shifted the focus over to voluntary actions. By studying rats and pigeons in controlled environments, which famously became known as Skinner boxes, Skinner gave us operant conditioning. He proved that animals learn by taking action and then directly experiencing the results of what they do. So while classical conditioning is about associations happening to the animal, operant conditioning is about the animal operating on their environment. They learn that their behavior has very specific consequences. Skinner identified a really stark contrast between two main types of consequences here. On one hand, we have reinforcement, which is any consequence that actually encourages an animal to repeat an action. And on the other hand, we have punishment, which is a consequence that decreases a behavior or just stops it entirely. Now, when we combine these concepts, we get the famous 4 quadrants of operant learning. But I want to make a really important note here. In behavioral science, the terms positive and negative do not mean good and bad. Not at all. Positive simply means you are adding something to the situation, like giving a treat. And negative just means you're taking something away.
Today, operant conditioning is basically the absolute backbone of modern training. It's how we teach skills like sit, drop, or stay. It's how we use clickers and markers to shape complex tasks and build voluntary husbandry behaviors. But, and this is a massive but, operant learning, where an animal thinks and makes choices, well, it only works if the animal feels safe enough to actually think.
And that critical need for safety brings us directly to Section 3, Seligman, Maier, and control.
We have to travel back to the 1960s to look at some truly groundbreaking experiments on stress, fear, and control conducted by Martin Seligman and Stephen Maier. This is where we understand what happens when safety is totally removed. These experiments changed everything about how we view stress. First, dogs were exposed to unavoidable shocks where they had absolutely no way to stop it. Then, those same dogs were placed in a brand new situation where escaping the shock was incredibly easy. But tragically, they found that the dogs who previously had no control wouldn't even try to escape. They simply lay down and accepted it.
This dark reality is what Seligman and Maier called learned helplessness. It is a profound psychological state where an animal learns that absolutely nothing they do matters, which leads them to completely give up. And I want to be clear, this isn't calmness, it is an emotional shutdown. In fact, it represents the exact opposite of learning.
And unfortunately, we still see this happening today in modern settings. When a dog shuts down during punishment-heavy training methods, or when a fearful dog seemingly complies but shows zero joy, curiosity, or engagement, that's learned helplessness. When an animal completely freezes up during grooming or handling because their past attempts to escape were ignored or corrected, they aren't being good. It is a complete loss of agency.
Okay, let's move to section 4, connecting the 3 pillars. Let's take a breath and synthesize how these historical insights create the cohesive architecture of modern animal training.
When we put this whole puzzle together, the complete picture really emerges. We absolutely need Seligman and Maier's foundation of safety and control first, because without that, nothing else works. Once the animal actually feels safe, we can successfully use Pavlov's classical conditioning to change their underlying emotions, like turning fear into calm. And only then can we effectively use Skinner's operant conditioning to teach specific behaviors and skills using consequences.
Finally, Section 5, Modern Ethical Animal Training.
So how do we actually translate this historical philosophy into actionable takeaways for today? Well, modern trainers have to prioritize safety and emotional regulation above all else. The brain simply cannot learn under threat. We use positive reinforcement to build confidence and agency. We actively avoid punishment to ensure we never risk triggering that fearful shutdown of learned helplessness. And we implement choice-based training, giving animals consent cues and stationing options so they always have control.
The crucial point that ties all of this science together is this one fundamental truth. Behavior is communication, not disobedience. When an animal struggles, we have to recognize that they are just telling us how they feel about their environment, their level of safety, and their understanding of the consequences. We aren't just out there suppressing behavior, we are trying to change underlying emotions.
So I want to leave you with a thought to chew on as we wrap up this explainer. As you go out and apply these scientific foundations from Pavlov's associations to Skinner's consequences, all the way to Seligman's requirement for safety, are you ensuring every single interaction is built on empathy, clarity, and true respect for the animal's internal emotional world? Thank you so much for joining me to explore the architecture of modern animal training. Keep asking questions, keep learning, and I'll see you next time.